Uh, Ipsita, shall we start?
Yes, please go ahead. Shall we start then?
Yes, I think all the audience are here.
Okay. Welcome everyone. I am Ankita Das, currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow, UK, and a member of the Breakthrough Science Society Abroad chapter. Welcome to today's program on Environment at the Crossroads, Science, Policy and Action. Before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce the Breakthrough Science Society, BSS. BSS is an all India science organization active over 20 states across India, committed to the following aims and objectives, among others: to foster a scientific mindset and help build a culture rooted in scientific understanding, to explain, promote, and popularize scientific discoveries and advancements, to raise awareness against unscientific beliefs, superstitions, religious fanaticism, bigotry, communalism, casteism, and other regressive ideologies, to oppose the misuse of science in ways that harm society or threaten humanity, to advocate for science and technology policies that serve the public interest. And lastly, to lead movements for the preservation and equitable use of our natural resources, environmental protection, and again, action against climate change. On this occasion of World Environment Day 2025, BSS has organized a range of programs across the country, reaching thousands of people and children to raise awareness about the current state of the environment and the steps needed to protect it. These initiatives include seminars, symposiums, conventions, demonstrations, rallies, plantation drives, and many more. As part of these efforts, the BSS Abroad chapter is also hosting this webinar today on the environmental crisis, commemorating the World Environment Day 2025, which is celebrated on June 5th every year. The topic of the discussion is Environment at the Crossroads, Science, Policy and Action. The aim of this program is to promote awareness, dialogue, and meaningful action on the deepening environmental crisis. In this program, we have 3 speakers and 4 expert panelists. The speakers will present on the following topics: the present state of the environment, government action on the climate crisis, followed by the role of individuals in combating environment degradation. After the presentations, we shall have a panel discussion with our distinguished panelists and the speakers. You may write your questions on the Zoom chat box or on the YouTube chat box. We shall collect all of those questions and pass them to our panelists during the discussion session. Without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker for the day, Dr. Moinak Mondal, a postdoctoral researcher at New York University, USA, and a member of our Breakthrough Science Society Abroad chapter. He will now speak on the topic. Moinak, please start.
Thank you, Ankita, for the introduction. Today, since I'm the first speaker, I'm going to be talking about the what is happening in our environment and the working of the entire the system that actually that is where we live in. So without further ado, let me share the screen. Am I visible? Is my screen visible?
Yes, Maina.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would start with an image that you see on the screen. The image you're looking at is from the Kokut province in the northwest of Greenland, which is the habitat of the indigenous Yakutia people. And behind you see the glaciers are flowing and they're melting. And in the foreground, you see heaps of garbage, lots of plastics and other garbage, and it started depositing in certain sites of those in the shore, and which eventually turned into a dumping ground. And these are quite toxic, and this is very, very bad for the environment. So we need to take a step back and think like we can see this ongoing pollutions, but there are some great impacts of those pollutions. This is an animation that shows since the inception of like when people started using fossil fuels, the total amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere uh, has increased. And if we look at the temperature record, the temperature, although it oscillates a bit, but over the past few years, it's been increasing at a constant rate. And 2024 was the warmest year recorded. And if we look at the plot on the right, this is actually a paleoclimate data. By that, scientists, they dig up sediment cores and they analyze and they recreate the temperature what it used to be before. And based on all those paleoclimate data, we did see there are some oscillations, but over the past few hundred years, the level of carbon dioxide has been over the top. It has never been as high as before. And if we look at the temperature record, which is the annual mean temperature anomalies, like how the temperature deviates from the mean average temperature, we can see that since 1960s, there is a sharp rise in the temperature. And in 2025, we have exceeded the global mean average temperature by 1.5 degrees centigrade. So all those heat that our Earth is accumulating, it has some effect. But to understand this, let us see these two images. Onto your right, you see the flow structure or the cloud cover in the atmosphere, and onto your left, it shows the ocean current. So these by showing this two image, I want you to understand how complex the flow is, because Earth is round and Earth is at a specific distance from the sun. Earth has a moon and that has tidal effects, and the inclination of the Earth is causing distribution of temperature, and because of this distributions and the different features on the Earth, it creates a very, very complicated flow structure. And this flow structure actually controls the local temperature, rainfall, and the air quality as well. And based on those parameters, life has evolved for millions and millions of years. Although the Earth is evolving, but still the rate of change of the like the astronomical parameters and the geological parameters is way big than what the species would perceive. So with those very long evolution, every species at a specific place on the earth, they evolve to sustain over the specific climate. But what happens when the temperature increases? So when the temperature increases, things or the flow starts to go a little different as it should be. And we can understand by a very simple experiment. So there are 3 glasses with water at 3 different temperature, and we put a drop of ink in all of them. So the left one is a lukewarm water, and the middle is really hot, and on to your right is the cold water. And as the time passes, we see how the color mixes. And we can see that in hot water, the motions are more chaotic, and the dye, it spreads throughout. So it just gives you an analogy, like when an enclosed system like Earth is accumulating heat energy, it makes all those motions more chaotic. Chaotic means they are becoming more unpredictable, and they are not following the pattern what they used to. And this has a great impact. And so what are those impacts? Most important thing to talk about here is the feedback process. Because the Earth is very interconnected, like different, all those phenomena in the Earth, one is connected to the others. So if one thing changes, it has a far-reaching impact. Now, over here, you see this is in Norway, and this is permafrost, which is thawing. So on all those Scandinavian and northern region in North Pole, the ground is frozen solid, and as nowadays the temperature is rising, all those permafrosts are melting, and all those permafrost, they actually dissolves a lot of carbon dioxide. So over here we can see as the temperature is rising, the permafrost is thawing, it releases carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, being a greenhouse gas, it actually helps to increase the temperature. So it's like a feedback process. And there are multiple feedback process in the nature. I'll show you another feedback process, which is like deforestation. Imagine there is a very thick, healthy vegetation, and some mining company started mining and clearing out the forest. So in those thick vegetations, like those in Amazonia, and even like many other places in India, like in Chhattisgarh or Northeast. So those forests, those forests has been evolved for thousands and thousands of years. And when you clear up a certain part of the forest, those forests would not be able to evapotranspire. So all those moisture that is coming from evapotranspiration, it actually helps for the rainfall. So if a significant chunk of the forest is removed, there are less rainfall, and which increases drought, and which makes the like the tree less healthy, and which further causes deforestation, because it's always easier to move into a forest which is not thick and it's easy to chop down trees. So just like this, there are many feedback processes in the nature. So now I want to talk about another important concept, which is the linear and nonlinear response. So in order to explain, I would probably show you the death and over the pandemics, and we can see that if the pandemic has a very linear response, that means in one day X number of people gets infected. Over a month there may be 30 times some number of people should get infected, had that been a linear response. But what we saw is that as the pandemic happened, it propagates at a much faster rate, and the growth is highly away from any linear response. So up to now, we understand the climate system are interconnected. There are a lot of feedback loops in different climate processes, and those can have a non-linear response. So if we put all those things together, a small event which is apparently not that dangerous at the moment, but can have a significant impact. And something I would like to show you with the video. Probably the video is not playing. So it's like a chain of blocks which is placed at a regular interval, and if one block is pushed forward, the entire thing can collapse and it can create a chain reaction. So probably I'll just start from here so that the video doesn't go too long. So this video actually shows you how a nonlinear evolution of any system can go like it can create a havoc, and something that we should be concerned about. And one of the things that is presently ongoing in India is the air pollution. And there has been several news articles and media on this topic. And we see that this is the distribution of the pollutants, which we call it like PM 2.5 or PM 10, which has a diameter of 2.5 or 10 microns. And there are also different types of gases. So all those gases and all those particulate matters, they are mostly coming from different plants, like different power plants or burning of fossil fuels. And those air pollutants are far above than the threshold level which is suitable for human. So this has been going on for a few decades, and day by day it's getting worse. And this is a significant problem, and it has so many impacts. And I think Manavendra is going to talk more about it. So I'll be brief here. So not just the air pollution, there are severe water pollution happening all over India, and all those water bodies, rivers, they are simply a place to dump all those wastage, and those polluted water is used by human, and it not only disturbs the marine life, but it also accumulates all those noxious pollutants, and it actually consumed by human, like those fishes that lives in those water bodies. So it enters into our food chain, and day by day it's getting worse. So on to your right, we see that the amount of renewable internal freshwater resources per capita, and we see that Nepal is way better than India, and day by day the situation is getting worse. And thirdly, I want to talk about the plastic pollution. So those plastics that we use in almost every household items, and also all those packaging, due to chemical weathering, it breaks into tiny microplastics, and those microplastics can enter into the food chain, either through like animal or plant, and this has a severe impact. So all those pollutions that are ongoing, it's actually disturbing the working of the climate processes. So what is at stake? Well, actually, there are so many things at stake. We are polluting the environment, we are changing the climate. In a changing climate, in a polluted environment, there are a lot of evolutions are happening in the microbial scales. Like what is happening to all those new viruses that are emerging, all those new bacteria. And so there is a lot of emergence of new diseases. And this is actually creating feedback, the nature's feedback. So since this discussion is only about the processes, so I would just like to conclude here. So what is the summary here? Natural system is highly interconnected system. There are feedbacks in nature. Positive feedback leads to amplification of disturbances, like we see. And disturbance propagate non-linearly. And there are certain conditions, when certain conditions are met, we call it tipping point. For example, when we increase the emission, then all those ice covers on both the poles, they are decreasing. And when the ice cover goes to a critical value, the ice would not be able to reflect the light back to the space, or the albedo would go down. And if there is the albedo goes down to a critical value, then the melting of those glaciers would be much faster. And so it's just an example for tipping point. And those tipping points can be caused by emissions of greenhouse gases and unregulated consumptions and depletions of natural resources, which is the pollution. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mainak, for the fantastic talk. Thank you so much. For our next talk, we have Dr. Manobendranath Bera. He is an assistant professor at Aizer Mohali, India, and a member of the Breakthrough Science Society Abroad chapter. He will present on the environmental policy in India.
Can you see my screen? Ankita, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much.
You are audible.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, and also thanks to my previous speaker for giving you scientific background as well as some statistics of the state of environment, particularly the environmental degradation in Indian context. So today I am given to talk on the environmental policy in particular, and the title I have kept is Environmental Policy in India, and in particular to what extent it is framed or these are framed to protect the environment. So let me start very quickly. So although for this 10-minute or 15 minutes discussion, I won't be able to go into details, but at least for your knowledge, I will mention few terms. For example, I will be discussing about the environmental policies and acts, particularly the amendments. Actually, there are quite a few important acts. These are directly or indirectly connected to our environment. For example, this environmental impact assessment that is shortly called or briefly called EIA. Another is Forest Conservation Act, then Environment Protection Act, and Air and Water Acts and Forest Right Acts. However, I won't be able to cover all of them, but I will emphasize mostly on the most important probably among these is the environmental impact assessment. So these I will be discussing little more details while I will be touching upon the other. And then I shall talk about, once again probably reiterating the situation of environmental degradation we have, in particular highlighting some aspects like deforestation and displacement. And then I will talk about environmental movement and particularly what can be our task. So let me start with this. So if you look at the environment related acts and policy and look at the constitutional provisions, essentially you see these three directive. One is the directive principle, which says that the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment. So protecting and improving the environment is essentially a state's responsibility, Indian state's responsibility. Another is the responsibility of the citizen, that is called this fundamental duty. So that means every citizen has the duty to protect and improve natural environment. And the third, I think the most important also in this context, we have in our constitution something called right to life, and it has been interpreted by the Supreme Court as the right to clean environment. So these are essentially the provisions we have in the constitution, but following that, there are many, particularly dozens of acts and notifications that are laid out. I will only mention these important ones as I mentioned, the environmental impact assessment and particularly these amendments, Forest Conservation Act, Environmental Protection Act, particularly the coastal regulation zones, Air and Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Acts, Forest Right Acts and Green Credit Program. Once again, I will just touch upon the first one, the most important one. If you look at the key shifts over time in these Indian environmental policies, essentially you can break down them in these in this time frame. For example, there had been some policy actually there, but which was coming mostly from the colonial administration in pre-1970s. So the state used to have control over forest, ignoring local communities. Then in 1980s, particularly, there had been a wave of environmental concern, particularly coming from some disasters, accidents. For example, notably, we have this Bhopal gas accident by Union Carbide. Then in 90s, essentially there had been a liberalization, for example, the gradual relaxation or dilution of these laws, particularly balancing a development of coming up with new amendments and so on and so forth. However, in 2000s, there had been some right-based and participatory policies to strengthen the local community and their involvement in the protection of the environment. But however, what we see is post-2014, there had been a very strong drive of diluting or ease of doing business reforms. And that obviously, essentially a kind of a threat, many environmentalists as well as the experts raise their concern about. Okay, so with this, let me start with the environmental impact assessment. So environmental impact assessment is important in the sense because it is framed to have this aim, the following aims: to evaluate potential environmental impact of proposed projects before approval, be it a public sector undertaking, that means the government project, or private, corporate-based, corporate managed projects, essentially. That means the private projects. To ensure sustainable development by minimizing ecological damage, to incorporate environmental consideration into decision making while you actually approving these projects, to promote transparency and public participation in the projects, and to protect natural resources, biodiversity and public health, and finally to enforce regulatory compliance and mitigate environmental risk. However, although with this aim it was introduced earlier, there had been an amendment and finally it was approved in 2020 during the COVID time. And this has been criticized for diluting the key safeguard present in earlier environmental impact assessment notification that was in 2006, and that seriously undermines the environmental protection. And as I get to see that all these amendments, all these relaxations are essentially to help or favor the industrial and corporate interest. So this is, let me see, just this particular environmental policy part. So for example, this environmental impact assessment has fewer aspects, and I will just focus on the important ones. For example, how the clearance of a project will be given. So in the earlier EIA notification, EIA, it's in short for environmental impact assessment, it says that there had been, every project had to go through this scrutiny before it is approved. That means no pre-facto clearance is permitted. However, in 2020, in this EIA, it is legalized to have post-facto clearance. That means you can start your project, your factory, your industry, and then you come up with some, you can come up with your assessment on how this factory or industry is going to impact the environment, and that will be accepted. And if it does not, for example, it says that projects that have begun without prior approval can now apply for clearance retroactively. So in this way, essentially it allows the industries to bypass the due process. That means before you even have your environmental assessment, there is a provision allowing the corporates essentially to start their industry. Public consultation. It says that it is mandatory for all the projects previously in 2006, and there should be a public hearing and the time for written responses at least for 30 days. This time period has been reduced to 20 days. Obviously, you understand most of the places we are talking about, for example, in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and all these places, Northeast, you don't have very good internet or phone connections, and people are also not equipped with these kind of technologies. So 20 days, 30 days itself is a very small time window. So reducing it in 20 days is essentially restricts the community to participate in this process. Obviously, that leads to lack of transparency. Exempted projects. So in the previous notification, there was no provision for exemptions as such. Most of the large projects required environmental impact assessment and public consultation. However, in 2020, the new notification exempts a large category of such projects. They call it strategic project. But it is rarely mentioned very clearly what do they mean by strategic, in which sense any project will be qualified as a strategic project. It is essentially the will of the government to just declare, and by that it will be protected. And for that, you don't need any permission. So that means the corporates can expand and set up high impact projects without any scrutiny. Validity of an environmental clearance. Once you have a clearance or get the approval from the ministry, from the government, previously this was valid for 30 years in the case of mining and 10 years for others. So that means every 30 years you have to once again come up with a full-scale environmental assessment before you will be allowed to continue further. However, this number has been increased. For example, it has been increased to 50 years for mining and 15 years for others. So that means it essentially gives the opportunity to exploit longer time and plunder natural resources without reassessment of environmental impact. Then annual compliance reporting. Previously, every 6 months, you have to essentially send a report, reassessment to the governments to check whether you are really complying with what you have committed to start with. And all these reports were publicly, but it was bound to be publicly available. EIA notification 2020 essentially dilutes that. It says that reporting can now be done instead of 6 months, once a year. And it is not necessarily made public. So that means it reduces accountability and transparency. So the corporates face less regulatory pressure. Monitoring mechanism. It says that whether the commitment to destroy or to disturb the environments are essentially complied with, essentially followed. There should be an independent monitoring committee. And there should, the civil society also can be part of that. However, this again has been diluted. And it says that there can be self-monitoring committee. That means an industry, let's say corporate, let's say Adani, come up with a mining project. Adani will himself produce essentially this monitoring, the report. Or it can have third party audit which can be bought or paid by, let's say, Adani. So you understand already that it reduces the independence and reliability also of these reports and increases the risk of conflict of interest in reporting violation. Strategic project exemption that I had mentioned earlier. There had been a new term called strategic project which is actually undefined. So that means any project, if government wants to install, to let it happen, it can just simply declare that it is a strategic project, so you will get a free go there. And violation and penalties. It says that in earlier notifications in environmental impact assessment, if you violate whatever you were committed to, then there had been a stringent penalties, and it can also lead to closure of the operation. That means closure of the factory or the industry. However, the new provision in 2020, it says that you just pay some penalty and you continue your operation. Obviously, it enables the industrialists to treat violations as the cost of doing business and reduce deterrence. In a sense, whatever the cost they have to pay as penalty, they can add it as their production cost, and whenever they will be selling their product in the market, they will just add this part. So people in turn essentially pay the penalty. So there is essentially no deterrence on the corporates to violate these environmental regulations. Decentralization. Previously, all the projects before it's being approved emphasized public participation, state level authority and state level authority for minor projects. Now, in the new provision, it has been essentially centralized. So that means it reduces essentially role of the local bodies or Gram Sabha in order to having the process, whether the Gram Sabha has agreed to that project or not, and how they are being affected, their voice will not be heard. So it marginalizes the local voices and the traditional knowledges. So it facilitates at the same time easier approval of the corporates, for the corporates. Access to information, as I was mentioned earlier, all these environmental impact assessment reports are publicly available and they were mandatory. However, this new provision does not essentially mandate that, in a sense, like they are not often accessible, or if at all they are accessible, they are released late. So makes it difficult for affected communities and NGOs to analyze and object to harmful projects. Apart from that, if you have a large cluster of projects, it mandatorily required cumulative impact assessment, like covering all aspects of environment, including social impact assessment. However, this is almost absent or is very weak in this new notification. So that means it enables projects approval that ignores broader environmental consequences. So now you kind of see what is the motivation of coming up with these amendments in 2020, which has been passed essentially. And it's essentially nothing but to reduce transparency, weakens compliance mechanisms, shorten consultation windows, and increases exemption. And naturally, it favors the corporate interest at the cost of environmental and community right. Okay, let me now pass to other policies as I was mentioning. It essentially happened almost in the similar fashion to make ease of doing business by the corporate. And these amendments, essentially how these acts are essentially diluted, I don't have much time to explain here. So for example, as I have mentioned, environmental impact assessment has been diluted. Forest Conservation Act also is diluted. What is more important and concerning is that they have redefined the definition of forest. Previously, forests are considered to be the ones which has ecological structure of a natural forest. It's not necessarily based on whether this forest is recorded in government document or not. Now, the government can redefine forest and say that they call it forest diversion. Let's say it is a forest, its ecological system, its biodiversity all qualifies to be called as a forest, but government says that no, this is no more a forest, so any non-forest use is now allowed. And in that way, it opens up a large tracts of forest for infrastructure and private plantation. In the similar manner, coastal regulation zones. For example, previously, any construction was banned within 500 meters of the coast, had stronger protection for ecologically sensitive zones and fisher folks' rights. Now it has been reduced to just 50 meters. I don't have time to discuss it in details, but it just to tell you, it obviously does not help protect environment. It rather makes easier for developers and the industrialists to build in ecologically fragile coastal zones. And then you have Air and Water Acts in the similar manner. It has been diluted. It's again self-certification and third-party audits promoted. That means anything that essentially, for example, industrial affluents or the greenhouse gas emission, all these things, if you take it together, there has to be an assessment. In fact, your Air and Water Act mandates that. But there is self-certification and third-party audit. That means it reduces compliance and weakens accountability. Forest Right Act, which is fundamental for the people living in the forests, particularly the tribal people, forest dwellers. There had been a recognition previously of Adivasi and forest dwellers' right. It's actually diluted. And as I say, that it undermines the community veto over projects in forest areas, which is another point which I again won't mention. It's called land acquisition, which is not directly connected to environmental policies or acts, but it is somehow linked. In 2013, the Land Acquisition Act required consent from 70 to 80% of affected people and mandatory social impact assessment. However, this is diluted once again, and it facilitates faster acquisition of land in the name of development or industry. So these are essentially just to give you an impression that the government policies, how they are framed and whether they are really to protect environment or to protect interest of the corporates or destroy environment. Now I just quickly flash on the environmental degradation part. I think Dr. Moinak already have mentioned. If you look at the crisis we have in 75 years, these are the numbers. We don't have much time. If there is a question, I will come back. Just to give you a flash, is that air pollution shortens average Indian life expectancy by 5.2 years. The pollution level is so high. Around 1.4 billion people in India live in areas where annual average particulate pollution level exceeds the WHO guideline. 42% on average annual particulate pollution has increased by 42%. So this is the situation. Same goes also with water. As Dr. Moinak already mentioned, in fact, if you look the situation between 2000 and 2050, this year, nearly 80% of wastewater remains untreated nationally. Major rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, Kaveri are classified as severely polluted. Groundwater contamination with heavy metals and nitrates affecting more than 50% of the districts, but half of India. there is a rise in waterborne disease, essentially. If you look at the soil pollution, over 30% of soil in India affected by contamination, heavy metal and pesticides, more than 50,000 hectares of land lost annually, and soil organic carbon declining by 0.5% per year. If you look on the right hand side, this plot says, the blue line, it says that the use of fertilizer over years, like starting from 1986 till 2017, it says that the use of fertilizer has been increased, while in return, the ratio of food grain production per unit fertilizer consumption has been reduced. That means the fertility of land is severely declining. What about surge of deforestation? It actually, the right plot essentially saying that if you start from 2001 until 2020, in every state almost, there has been rise in deforestation. If you look at the statistics from 2000 to 2025, almost 2.33 million, that means 23 lakh hectare of tree cover lost. 90% of this loss occurred in natural forest. 668,400 hectare of forest cover lost in last 30 years only. And essentially, as Moinak was mentioning, this deforestation essentially induces a positive feedback to further worsen the deforestation, the green cover or vegetation cover. Anyway, so what about the displacement of tribal community and forest dwellers? In 1950 to 80s, there had been something around 15 lakh people got displaced. In 20 years, coming from 1980 to 2000, nearly 30 lakh people got displaced. And in last 25 years, from 2000 to 2025, more than 50 lakh people. And again, these are coming from government data, and I believe the number are few-fold more. So this is the situation essentially. Now let us look at the environmental movements essentially. Probably this is the only hope we have. I just give you a few numbers to give you an impression. So there had been Hasdeo Arand coal mine. I think you probably know it's happening in Chhattisgarh. Then you have Niyamgiri bauxite mining. It's again, so previous one was essentially by the Adani group. This one is Vedanta Resources. And this project is still going. It's a massive deforestation in the name of mining. POSCO steel plant in Odisha. Initially it was POSCO, and then it has taken over by JSW, and it's still continuing. And you see the number of affected communities and the number of villages. And all these projects essentially could function because of dilution of these post-2014 amendments in the acts and the policies. Then goes Kalinganagar steel plant. It's by Tata Steel. The same story again. Dhirauli coal block. It's by Adani Group. Same story again. Gondalpura coal block in Jharkhand. Same story again. Adani Enterprise and Limited. And there are many more. Just to give you an environmental movements, a list of environmental movements, again, only the notable ones. Chipko movements, Silent Valley movements, Appiko movement, this is in Kerala, in Karnataka and Western Ghats, Anti-Starlight movement, there are many, as you can see. So I'm not going to read, in case you are interested, I will come back to them. So there are several and many. However, all these movements somehow still don't manage to essentially thwart back these environmental policy amendments to make ease of doing business and to favor the corporates and destroy environment. So what we need to do. So I will say a few words about this and conclude my discussion here. First, we have to note all these laws that we are talking about are national level laws. And the corporates exploiting and destroying these environments are also national, multinational, and transnational. However, the movements, environmental movements, are often localized. Majority of the people don't know about the movements essentially. Majority of the people also don't realize the seriousness of environmental crises, thus cannot connect with these movements. No national level coordination yet. So we need a national level organization for that. What we can do. First, we can stand by the ongoing movements. This is, I think, first and foremost. Initiate awareness campaign on environmental crisis, particularly linking local level crisis with the global one, as Moinaka was mentioning, how environmental pollution essentially leads to climate crisis and vice versa. Emphasize on government environmental policies, acts, amendments, and motives behind them, and work for a mighty people's movement on the national level. I think with this, I thank you for your attention, and I will come back to this in the question answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbera, for the informative and very insightful presentation on the environment policy of the government. So next, our speaker of the session and the last speaker for the day is Dr. Chandana Hrishikesh. She finished her PhD from University of Rome, Italy, and is a member of Breakthrough Science Society Abroad chapter. She will speak on the role of individuals in combating environmental degradation. Over to you, Chandana.
Thank you very much, Ankita, for the introduction. And I feel very happy to share my views on the topic, how as individuals we can counter through our actions to the environmental degradation. So environmental degradation, it's a shared concern, and each and every individual have to realize it and act accordingly. So these are the points that I'll be sharing, talking upon. So the first thing, it's a universal impact. So it doesn't have any boundaries, as air and water pollutants can travel across countries, and it leads to climate change, which affects weather, agriculture, and human migration worldwide. It results in the depletion of the natural resources like water, air, soil, leading to long-term damage to the ecosystem and also the human health. So we all have somewhere or other came across such incidents wherever we live. So this is a warning that we have to take action. So what solutions we can inculcate to improve the air, water, and soil quality? So starting with the usage of public transport, cycle, or by walk, that is limiting the use of private vehicles. So when I say private vehicles, limiting the usage of private vehicles, we can reduce the use of taxis, private taxis. And then the online food apps that we use, it consumes it consumes the energy. So it also needs the plastic waste. It involves the plastic waste. Also, it causes traffic. So these are the things, these are very small things that we neglect. And just to be in our comfort zone, we sometimes do not act mindfully. So the thing is, we have to take the actions very mindfully. And then the burning of the waste and leaves, we would have seen this practice in our neighborhood, burning of waste or the leaves that are accumulated. So while doing that, the soil loses its essential microbes and it creates a lot of air pollutants. So we should avoid, and what we can implement is that segregation of waste. So the compost, the organic waste that we collect, leaves or the kitchen waste, we can compost it and use it for the soil as a natural organic compost. So next point is obviously the reduction of plastic use, that is mainly the single-use plastic. We can see the impact of this wherever we should see the green trees, plants. we are able to see the plastic around. And then the disposal of e-waste and batteries. So basically these waste, they contains lot of heavy elements which pollutes our environment, and we should dispose them in a mindful way. And planting of more and more trees and supporting the green environment. So if not a big garden, we can at least opt for plants in pots and the terrace gardening. Whatever space is available, we can utilize it in a meaningful way. And then maintaining the vehicles is important, because the vehicles which are maintained, they produce less gases. That is, the engines which are well maintained, they burn fuel efficiently. So the next point is avoiding water waste. Avoiding wasting water. We don't even realize while doing our daily course, for example, washing dishes or washing our clothes or even brushing our teeth. We don't even realize that the tap is open and the water is just pouring out. So we have to again be very mindful while doing our work. And dumping the chemicals into the water, so it pollutes water, and also the groundwater is being polluted, soil also is being polluted. And then promoting the rainwater harvesting. This is a very important thing that has to be installed in homes and apartments. So in the news, we would have seen the Bangalore incident where in the summers, there was no water for the residents. And people were paying 2,000 rupees, 4,000 rupees for the water tank. So when we can save water, when we can store water, we can rejuvenate the groundwater. So why not to opt for rainwater harvesting? So this is a very important installation that has to be done in our houses, apartments, and elsewhere. The Tamil Nadu government has made it mandatory for the houses and apartments to install rainwater harvesting. And then supporting sustainable farming practices. So that is also an important step that we can take. So we all know that how the air pollution is leading to the environmental crisis and the health crisis. So it affects each and every part of our body, starting from our eyes, skin, our lungs, whatnot. So to avoid these, what steps as individuals we can take? We can promote indoor plants. There are certain plants which are good for the environment, the surrounding that we are living. So we can promote the planting of those plants, and using of masks during high pollution days. Then using water purifier and boiling water has become a necessity. Without taking such step, the consumption of water is very, very dangerous. And we should avoid going near the polluted water bodies. So as I already mentioned, that there is no boundary for pollution. We cannot say that I'm in another state and the pollution is in another state and I'm safe in whichever region I am. So considering the example of Delhi, the stubble burning that happens in Punjab and Haryana affects Delhi, the weather, the climate of Delhi. So this is a very serious concern. And what we can do to do this is, so I would like to mention that these effects, that these are mainly the vulnerable communities suffer a lot. Those who have the access, they can somehow manage. But vulnerable communities like the rural and urban poor face the worst consequences. People suffering from chronic diseases, children, people with old age, uh, pregnant ladies. So they all face the consequences in a much greater way. And the livelihood of many people who are depending on farming, fishing, tourism, it gets affected because of the pollution that we are seeing and the degradation of the environment. So what steps we can take to tackle the pollution beyond boundaries? So the crop residue should be used for biocomposting and mulching. The stubble burning should be avoided, and the stubble can be converted into biochar fodder or bioenergy. And in our day-to-day life, again, we have to be very mindful to use as much less plastic as possible, and wasting electricity, and not just electricity, the natural resources, water. Water. So we have to be very mindful while using the resources. And the polluting or polluting the environment in any way, we can just reduce our carbon footprints. So waste management at home, as it has already been discussed, that reduce in a way that if we cannot neglect, if we neglect the use of plastic bags, that is, we can reduce the use of plastic bags, and instead we can opt for jute bags or the cloth bags. And then reusing. So one thing can be reused. If it is possible to reuse, we can make the changes in our lives. And recycling, the recyclable plastic or the papers that we use. So these are all the things that can be recycled, and we should promote it. And then the water and energy conservation. So it is again a part of being a mindful activity that we can include. Then eco-friendly lifestyle choices, and also the green celebrations and daily practices. So what it means is that if we want to gift if we are attending some birthday party and we want to present a gift, so instead of wrapping it in the fancy wrap, we can use the paper bag to avoid the plastic that is being used in the wrap, and to avoid overuse of internet. So whenever we have the unnecessary photos, messages, or emails, they consume a lot of energy to be stored. So this step we can also take at individual level to reduce the degradation of environment. So this responsibility is collective. At first, it starts from individual level and then as a society. So no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So with this, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chandana, for such an informative discussion on the individual's role. Now, I would like to thank all of our speakers for the informative presentations. And moving forward to the next part of our program, that is the panel discussion. Once again, if you have questions, please write them on the Zoom chat box or the YouTube chat box. We shall direct them to our panelists. And with this, I would like to hand over the platform to Dr. Dibbashankar Das and Dr. Ipshita Das for proceeding with the panel discussion. Dibbashankar is a research associate at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, and a member of BSS. And Ipshita is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University, USA, and a member of the Breakthrough Science Society Abroad chapter. Over to you, Dibbo and Ipshita.
Thank you, Ankita Ji. It was a wonderful 1 hour discussion we had with all our speakers. For the panel discussion now onwards, I would like to invite another person who is with us today. He's Pinaki Chandra. Uh, he is actually currently doing his PhD at Cornell University, USA. So, along with all the speakers, I would request Pinaki also to join in the panel discussion and contribute his thought to this discussion. I'd request all the panelists to switch on their videos and so that it will be much more interactive. So there are lots of questions in the chat box while the discussion was going on. So I think, Ishita, we can go from the beginning and we can request them to switch on their microphone and ask the question directly to the speaker. Uh, some of the questions is already answered. So initially, there was a question by Shuddha Sattva Das, and that was directed to Moinak, but Moinak has already answered that. Uh, so probably I would suggest let's go with Viru Salagar. If you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Uh, Viru Salagar, can you unmute and ask it? Otherwise, we can read it out. Okay. So it seems like it cannot, but then we can read it out. Okay. So he's asking like in which countries has best environment and why, and which country has worst environment and why. So like probably every one of us are not performing well, but who is performing better than everyone else and who is performing worst? If any of you can comment, it's not directed to anyone else, so anyone can.
Maybe Dr. Moinak, you start.
Yeah, sure. It's hard to say because, like I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, every ecosystem on Earth is actually a result of thousands and thousands years of evolution. So the biological entities are constantly interacting with the ambient environment, and through those several interactions, like several thousands years of interactions, they find a balance. And so you can't say there is a good place or a bad place in Earth. If you go to desert, you find ecosystem and all those animals and plants, they are evolved in a way to survive for that particular ecosystem. So we can't say there is a good or bad environment, but we human, we actually created the environment, not created, rather changed the environment. And that change is what is causing the destruction. Manuda, you might want to add something to that.
Oh, I think you actually answered it. Any industrialized nation is essentially responsible for the major part of this environmental pollution. Any nation. For example, if you see the countries like USA or countries in Europe, they moved their production houses or the factories to underdeveloped third world country. For example, the fabrics, the cotton that we wear and all these are now manufactured in Bangladesh, in China. All industry, electronic industries are now in China, Taiwan. So that's how they try to avert their own the pollution in their own country. However, they are responsible in the other country. In the age of globalization, you cannot actually separate out this country of that country, as Chandana was correctly mentioning. Pollution is not localized. The entire ocean pollution is essentially affecting all the countries at the end of the day. So overall and on an average, we are not in a healthy position. We need to act fast. So that's probably the answer.
Thank you, Moinak and Manavendra. We shall move on. Next question is from Shiva Agarwal. Shiva, can you unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Yeah, sure. So my question was regarding the new EIA 2020 notification, which Dr. Manavendra mentioned. Can any information be obtained through RTI Act?
It can be, but again, information has to be accessed through RTI is also a process. Previously, it was mandatory that whenever there is an information, it has to be put out on public, and it's mandatory. It should be accessible to everyone without whether I'm interested to look at or not. It's a different question, but it should be there. So it is, but again, whenever there is some issues and you go for RTI, there is always a threat, and there are. So again, essentially, it's available through RTI. You can again, but it obviously adds another layer of hindrance. In many cases, they have this provision even not to share at this moment. They will just delay it. Okay, Shiva.
Okay, we'll go to the next
Dibbo,
question.
your voice is not audible. It's little feeble.
Yeah, it's mic is actually, I have to put it this way. Now it's okay? Yeah, I think it is.
Better.
So, yeah. So, next question is from Bharat Nayar. If you can unmute and ask the question directly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Manavda. Yeah, because I was wondering in terms of the resistance among the communities and among citizen scientists and the community by itself. Because I was wondering that now that the freedom of expression, the freedom of free speech is all coming under scrutiny, and even scientific, so some scientific, so the scientific inquiry is also coming into, yeah, so it's coming under threat. How are we going to deal with these things in the future? In the sense that we are resisting, so in our own ways, we are trying to express this to our friends, our communities, among the injustices that we face and that the communities face as a whole. Because I was wondering, how do we move forward from this? It's just really hard to even express these things to others. So, or even to say these things out loud in public. So we are just trademarked as complete anti-nationalists, which is not the case. So I was just thinking, how, because what are your thoughts on, because yeah, this in fact, good.
Thank you, Bharat. It's a very good question. We could have taken this at the end possibly, but let us discuss. But I would request other panelists if they want to also say, because it's a very common question he has asked. Maybe Pinaki, Chandana, you can start, and then it's a very
Yeah, I
important.
can chime in. It's just a difficult question, an open-ended one. Just from the top of my mind, and I'm sort of thinking loudly here. The issue is how we handle development aspirations and how that question coincides with the question of environmental degradation and conservation. So, for example, a recent study which has been conducted in University of Pennsylvania, two political scientists, Tariq Thachil and Sukhbir Singh, um, they talk to Delhi residents and conduct intervention, randomized controlled trials, and ask, well, why is pollution not a concern for Delhiites? How is it not an electoral matter as it should be? Um and going against popular ideas that, well, Indians are not aware that there's environmental awareness and they don't want to act on it. There are more material aspirations that they care about as compared to environmental concerns. These two scholars, they write against it. They show through their reportage and several interviews and surveys that, in fact, Indians and particularly Delhiites are much more um, environmentally conscious as compared to other metropolitan populations. However, what what comes into question is how we manage the question of aspiration, and this has to do with partisan politics. So when asked about whom do you blame for the air pollution in Delhi, 60% of the participants blamed the government, whereas the 40% rest blamed BJP. And when interviewed further, these were populations who claimed loyalty to their parties. So the first step to sort of talk about environmental policy and how can we bring forth pollution as an electoral plank, as an electoral question, is to disrupt partisan politics. Is how can we disrupt party loyalties and actually increase democratic accountability. And that is a long form process, and this is a process that is not just restricted to environmental concerns. It's a question of social justice and economic justice, in some sense. And the second thing I'll say is that climate change is the politics of time. A month back, I was asked in a class as to why the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is independent of the UN in some senses. So every other body in the United Nations, it has an indefinite timeline. So if you ask somebody when is the Israel-Palestine conflict going to be solved, they will say whenever we are working on it, we'll figure it out. But when you talk about climate change, there is a specific timeline to it. You have to solve it to respond to it within a certain time period. And therefore it invokes of certain urgency. So I guess the sense of time and the perception of time needs to be nurtured within our local communities. Another example would be in 2016 in the Rwandan conference on hydrofluorocarbons. India was last in the roster of countries who claimed that we should be given some levy, some sort of a discount on our plans to decrease HFC contamination. And this has to do with aspirations for air conditioning in India. It's a middle class aspiration, and by 2050, the goal is that 50% of Indians need to have air conditioning, and air conditioning is important. These cities are unlivable. So you have a two-pronged problem where we both need to bring forth development, because that's a social justice concern, but that also needs to happen with more democratic accountability. And I think I'll end at that. Yeah.
Thanks, Pinaki. And if anyone else want to comment on Bharat's question.
Moinak, you want to add something?
No, I mean, it's very well explained. And like what Pinaki mentioned, it's all of based on timeline. So we all know that forestation would act as a carbon sink, but the problem is if you just plant trees, it takes time to grow. It takes at least 10 to 20 years for a tree to be able to carbon negative. So as you chop down a forest and you plant saplings, even like for the past 10 15 years, the amount of carbon that is getting sequestered is not carbon negative. So it takes time. And the problem is all those mitigation endeavors, they uh, like they don't um, uh, so they actually don't uh, uh, I mean regard this timeline, and I think that's the main problem. So we all want all the solutions like now, but we probably we do not have the patience, or it's like because everything happens in a 5 years time scale, because that is how the new election like repeats.
Yeah, maybe I speak.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Dipo, your voice is still a little feeble. Huh? Okay, so let me first try to kind of discuss what Bharat says, and then maybe on Pinaki's point what he has added. If I ask this question bluntly, what is the alternative? There are two possibilities. Environmental degradation is happening, is threatening lives, livelihood, entire planet, including our nation. So we accept it, let everything as going, let them going on, or we raise our voice. We try to initiate awareness campaign nationwide, coordinate and bring more and more people in environmental movement to develop a nationwide mighty environmental movement. So these are the two choices. What do you want to do? This is the first question. Second, even if you accept whatever is going on, it's not going to respite you. People have to understand this part. That accepting whatever going on today, it essentially is going to affect not their next generation, their own generation will get affected. It's actually happening. So this is first. So there is no alternative or easier alternative. You have to act. How these actions may be, this discussion can be there. Depending on the situation, depending on the place, this may differ. For example, for all these big scale devastations or degradations or crises, you cannot solve everything overnight. There are two ways essentially you approach. One is called adaptation, another is mitigation. Whatever happened, let's say I come up with reforestation, which I think Moinak said I will add there. Just by planting, you cannot create a forest. Forest is not just some collection of trees. Forest means it's a collection of trees together with a biodiversity and ecology connected with that. All these flora, fauna, insects, everything together is a forest. It's not just some plants. So I wipe out forest and just plant, let's say, palm tree for palm oil. It's not going to essentially help you mitigating the environmental degradation. So essentially there is no other choice than developing a mighty people's movement for environment. Second, when I say or you say development, we have to be very careful here. Development for whom? When you say I have aspiration for development, how really it is or how it has been fed in your mind to increase their market, let's say. That is what we call consumerism. Right? All these has to be very carefully taken care of. Third, every step we make in a civilization, because we play, we do, we act with human consciousness, we try to master our nature, that means we are bound to essentially distort the environment. It's a question of at what cost, how to optimize. If you come to this particular question, then you will see in today's time, whatever is going on, it is essentially not for the benefit of the people. I have diamond mine in Bakswa, let's say, or any other forest. What is the need of diamond for common people? To eat? What is that? So if you look at it in this way, then you will see the so-called development of this narrative, what they have raised or they kind of propagate, has very little to do with for the benefit of the people. So this also has to be highlighted to counter. And we have to learn from all these small-scale environmental movement to big-scale other movements. Like farmers' movement, we never thought it can really thwart back these farm policies, farm bills, right? But it could. How they could? Because all the farmers, they could identify their interest in this movement. They could identify with it. Unfortunately, all these environmental movements that we have today, they are localized. They're not coordinated, although we know all are interconnected, but we hardly realize that. So I think this is what we have to do. People like you, Bharat, myself, Moinak, everyone else in this audience have to play their part to essentially aware the people that it is not just your problem. Your problem is also my problem is also someone else's problem. So we need to support each other and coordinate. And I think that is where the role of breakthrough also will come. Maybe we'll discuss this if time permits later. Yeah, that's my response to Bharat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pinaki, Mainak, and Manavendra. Next question is from Biplab Kumar Mahata. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
We cannot hear you actually. Your mic shows unmuted, but your voice is not coming.
Biplab, are you
Am I
speaking?
audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
now it's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Biplab, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Biplab, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Problem.
We cannot hear you now.
No. Yeah, I think what
Yeah.
Bipin asked in the question, that is part of it is already described discussed by Manavendra. And if that issue solves, then probably Biplab can ask later. For time being, we'll go ahead with other questions. There was a question by Arnab regarding tipping point that is answered by Mainak at the chat. So there is one question from Shammo. So if you can unmute yourself and ask the question, Shammo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I understand that obviously the goal is to avoid climate change or global warming and maybe even reverse what global warming or climate change that we've already suffered by carbon capture or other such goals. But obviously all of this is on some sort of timeline. We are living through the effect of climate change in some senses, and it's unlikely that in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years we will have reversed what global warming has already occurred and the effects of that. So, given all of that, I was wondering uh, if the panelists would be able to comment on what sort of policies may be adopted by governments in different countries or at local levels in order to mitigate the impact of climate change on the lives of the civil citizens and the population. Um, Basically, heat, storms, all this kind of stuff that happens due to climate change. What kind of policies may governments adopt in order to deal with these as systemic issues instead of just responding to them as some sort of emergency response?
Yes, any of you can join and try to answer. Pinaki, maybe Moina, or
I think Moina can start. He is being the expert in environmental.
Any systemic endeavor, like if you let's say you want to protect your coastline, so it only happens like we human only react to something when it hurts us, and everything is happening with something in mind. Like it's not like everyone is doing it for the sake of humanity, but they also have some other agenda. Perhaps it for the next immediate election or maybe some other long-term goals. But like the incremental development that we can do is I would say the simplest uh, would be to protect the environment and plant trees, um, because you cannot ask like states to reduce your economic growth. It's I mean, it's improbable. But if you can just preserve your environment, um, that that can serve for the long term. But like, what can you do? I think like we have to create this kind of subculture in a way, like who would in like in uh, in the society you live in. So if you follow a certain subculture, I am saying subculture because it has to be a part of your identity. Uh, like if you identify yourself, and probably you can influence others. So uh, I can only think of like uh, community-based living, uh, and also like yeah, I would just say uh,
Maybe I
this.
should clarify, if I may. My question was not about what we as individuals can do. I was simply asking about state policy, and if any of the panelists would be able to comment on the possibility of what kind of policy may be adopted by states to mitigate the impact of climate change on the lives of civilian populations. For example, we have cyclones happening more frequently in the Bay of Bengal. Every time a cyclone happens, there's some sort of emergency response that is set up by state governments or by the National Disaster Management Agency, etc. But we do not see any sort of systemic response that says that, okay, we know that we are going through climate change, we are going through global warming, so cyclones are more frequent. What can we do to mitigate the impact of that on populations that live in, for instance, the Sundarbans? Or, for instance, the fact that we know temperatures are going up in Calcutta. If temperatures are going to be 45 degrees with a relative humidity of 80%, people will just die on the streets. What can we do to help them at a state level? So when I say we, I don't mean, we as individuals or Breakthrough as an organization. I'm asking about if there's any sort of response that can be thought of at a systemic level coming from a state government or the municipal corporation or maybe the national government at that kind of level. I gave examples from India. Of course, we may look at examples from other parts of the world. That's what my question was about, just to clarify.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, of course. I guess it depends on who you are asking. So if you go ask Bill Gates, his answer will be carbon sequestration and more carbon credits. But as has been already demonstrated by several social scientists and economics, carbon credits is a scam just like insurance is. Um, so, and I say this not as an empiricist, but more as someone who is interested in an interpretive social science. And my answer to this question would be, how do we understand climate change interventions? Because largely interventions in climate sciences, in Earth system sciences, has been through techno-scientific interventions. That is true. Well, we need to build better technologies to mitigate climate change and disaster management. But as a social scientist, my answer would be, well, we need to look through the socioeconomic history of, let's say, disaster in India. So, for example, and several environmental historians in India has shown this, that floods and cyclones, especially, used to be a season of opportunity as compared to disaster what it is now. So for example, in Assam, in Bangladesh, in West Bengal, floods came as an opportunity where you could actually use it to have better agrarian floodplains for crops. But due to colonial hydrological plans, building of dams, bridges, etc., the same opportunity has now transformed into vulnerability. And this has to do with the hegemony of techno-scientific intervention that, well, technology can solve everything. I guess the beginning, the sort of starting point, the entry point in this conversation would be to rethink and fundamentally rethink what we understand. What we understand about technology and what we understand about policy. Uh, Within the social sciences, there is this saying that policy is a method to undermine politics using good science, and good science is generated more from social sciences than from technology. So I guess that is like my answer to what is the systemic issue that we are dealing now. And in terms of policy, I guess, and this has been a long form answer, which is we need to situate where the accountability lies, which has largely been with like asking individuals to be accountable, asking the state to be accountable, but looking at it from a sort of globalist perspective. It is, in fact, the developing countries who have been contributing much largely to climate change. Sorry, the developed countries who have been contributing largely to climate change than the developing countries. The onus of climate change mitigation lies more on the United States than it does on India, for example. So the whole debate on what the UN calls the common but differentiated responsibility, where we have some common responsibilities and then we have different responsibilities among countries, that needs to be talked through, and that needs to be a state policy that most developing countries embody in their practice, that they should be resisting imposition by first world countries when they ask that you should restrict your development and contribute more to climate mitigation, and there should be more political pressure on the first world international community that they should be the ones who contribute largely to the mitigation effort than, for example, Bangladesh.
I also want to add one point to that. When we talk about mitigations and also the responsibilities, we also take into account the limitation of the planetary boundary layer. Like for example, if you live in a isolated place, you have limited natural resources, and so the ecological system has access to a limited region. So I mean, uh, we by at any cost we need to protect the ecology.
And just to add to that also, and I wanted to add this to my previous response, which is we need good science that is not responding to the market. So, for example, the agricultural sector pollutes heavily in India, and that has to do with how the agricultural sector has been responding to market needs. We are growing rice in Punjab and cotton in Maharashtra, when both places are not suited for such kind of agriculture, and this has to do with the immediate market needs that, well, we need rice in Punjab and therefore Punjab has to grow rice. It doesn't have to. And especially India, states like these, they need to invest more in the public sector. So for example, MSPs right now are just restricted to 3 crops. Economists have called for more than 300 crops that should be included in the MSP roster. So I guess good science that is not responding to the market but actually is responding to what the environment needs and what is environmentally conscious, and that can go along with the development that our country needs.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to add on this? If not, so due to the time boundaries, we shall conclude the session soon. So we'll take the last question from Shuddho Satto Das. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
I think Shuddha probably is not in the audience anymore.
Okay, I shall read out the question then. Given the scale of climate patterns, it seems impossible that humans can invert the effects of their actions. Can any of the panelists tell us of any effort that has a realistic chance? Only one I know of is the Sub-Saharan Green Belt Initiative.
Well, there are, back in the 80s where we have ozone holes forming. So we could take a global initiative and we could cut down on the emission of the chlorofluorocarbon. So if every state acts on it, it's possible. It's not that we haven't taken action before. Yeah.
Anyone else want to add? Chandana, if you want to add anything.
I agree with the answer that Dr. Mainak shared. So the policies that have been, I mean, the efforts that are already, I mean, we have we have gone through. So I think the steps, if we can implement them, so that would be a good way. So,
Anyone else wants to add something?
If not, then I would request Ipsita to go ahead and conclude the session. Yeah.
Sure. Well, with that, we would like to conclude the session now. I, on behalf of BSS Abroad chapter, would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the panel members, Dr. Moinak Mondal, Dr. Manabendranath Bera, Dr. Chandana Hrishikesh, and Pinaki Chandra for sharing their time, insights, and expertise. I also thank all the participants here for being part of this important discussion. Special thanks to the organizing team for conducting the webinar smoothly and effectively. As highlighted by our speakers and panelists, the environmental crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is already causing severe damage across India and around the world. Sadly, despite growing evidence, our government continues to turn a blind eye to this urgent reality. Instead of addressing the root causes, the government introduced the Environmental Impact Assessment 2020 policy and amended other environmental related acts which prioritize corporate interests and the so-called ease of doing business over the protection of natural habitats. Practically, there is little to no meaningful action to curb climate change, preserve or expand forest cover, or prevent pollution of the air, water, and soil. On one hand, we see increasing environmental degradation, pollution, deforestation, and displacement affecting the health, livelihoods, and lives of millions. On the other hand, we witness the government handling over natural resources and the environment to corporate interests, with little regard for environmental consequences. In this situation, the only path forward is a united people's movement, one that stands for environmental protection, human rights, and the future of our planet. To support this cause, the Breakthrough Science Society has launched a nationwide public awareness campaign to build strong grassroots level environmental movements. We sincerely hope that more and more people will join BSS and take part in this vital effort to save humanity. With that appeal and hope, we conclude today's program. Thank you all once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.